Hello, welcome back to the Fantasy Bomb podcast representing RotoBaller. I am Pierre Camus, lead editor for NFL and MLB. And with me is my co-host, as always, Chris Mangano, who is our head writer and now official ranker for Best Ball. We're going to talk about Best Ball MFL10 today. And Chris got to dip his toe into some rankings, so we're going to break those down, and he's going to rip apart mercilessly my rankings. But before we get into that, Chris, how's it going?
I'm good, and don't worry, I can't rip apart yours too badly because I'm sure mine are terrible. This is the first time I've ever done rankings. I'm not really a big rankings kind of guy, so I'm sure mine are just as bad.
No, they're all good. They're all good. And, it's funny because we've talked best ball quite a bit. We've done a couple episodes dedicated just to MFL 10s. And we talked about ADP, talked about roster construction a few weeks ago. Those who listen to us regularly, we had MFL Todd from Fanball on this show. And joining us, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have Mike Beers, who I am in an actual MFL 10 with. Whether he knows it or not, I picked right after him, and he's going to help us deconstruct a lot of that data because we take part in these drafts, we do the rankings, we discuss it, but I'll confess I'm not a master statistician. I'm not one who pores over spreadsheets day after day. Chris, I don't think you do that either, right? So we need someone, an expert, to help come and deconstruct all those numbers and crunch them for us.
Yeah, he has them all. He's been collecting MFL data since I think 5 or 6 years ago. He has it all, so I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully, we can get him on here.
Oh yeah, he's definitely coming on here. But what we're gonna do now is actually give you all a sneak preview. Not even released yet on the site, just finalized. Something it was hard for me to believe that I couldn't find this really any other site out there. As popular as MFL 10s have become, we have our own in-house best ball rankings, just like you'd see for redraft or dynasty. But we have a crew meaning myself, Chris, and Phil Clark, one of our writers who's done excellent work across best ball, dynasty, all sorts of articles this offseason. And so we have our consensus ranking for RotoBaller for best ball leagues available this coming week. It will be up on the site. And we're going to break it down for you now and give you a sneak preview as to who we have ranked where. So if you're going to join any MFL 10s, do some drafts, because you know that, aside from some rookie drafts that might be going on in some dynasty leagues that are ready to go, there's not a lot of drafting going on. For redraft leagues, you're waiting. MFL 10, that's a chance for you to go right ahead and make a team right now for the cost of $10. So we're going to talk about those rankings. And then before we get into that, I have a little announcement to make. And that is that there's a new platform called Reality Sports Online where you can actually be an NFL general manager yourself. So you can build and manage your fantasy team just like a real NFL GM. It was created by former NFL front office personnel. It's got a revolutionary free agency auction room, just like real NFL free agency. And you can negotiate and sign the NFL's top talent to contracts, single year, multi-year, whatever you want. You can host up to 32 teams. And there are a ton of cool features. Guys, you've got to check it out. You can go right now and jump into a mock free agency auction. If you like what you see, use the promo code BALLERS and you get a 10% discount on your team today. So go ahead and check it out at realitysportsonline.com, where fantasy just got real. So, speaking of mocks, we have plenty of mocks going on. We're actually, I reluctantly dragged Chris into a rookie mock that we're doing as soon as this show ends. So the timer is ticking, right? We're going to be dipping into our own mock drafts. We're doing rookie mocks. We're going to do redraft mock. We're going to do an auction. We have so much going on, and we're going to break all that down in the next couple of weeks. But for today, let's get straight into the rankings for best ball. Now, what I want to do, Chris, before we get into the actual rankings, I actually like to talk a little bit about how you rank, because realistically, ranking just means you get all, the player names, you get a bunch of guys, you put them in order, right? You put them in order you like. Anybody can do rankings. You just say, oh, Gurley's number 1, Kamara's number 2. Anybody can do that. But I want to give a little bit of insight, especially since this is your first time really getting into it. What was your thought process as far as making the rankings, especially for a very specific format like best ball?
Yeah, it was really tough because I don't generally, when it comes to best ball, I tend to prefer to rank players based on position because, yeah, in the early rounds, you're probably just drafting best player available most of the times. But at a certain point, you have to start really factoring in roster construction. And we talked about this with MFL Todd maybe about a month ago or so when he was on, how important roster construction is, how many running backs you have, how many wide receivers you have, tight ends, QBs, etc. When do you draft them, right? So it gets to a point where, you might be in like, say, round 9 or 10, and there might be a wide receiver that you really like, or that you like more than the running backs that are on the board, but you might only have 2 or 3 running backs. And if you don't take a running back now, while there's still some value, you're going to be left with running backs you hate at the end of your draft. And is it worth it to get that wide receiver you like a little more than that running back? No, because roster construction is so important in best ball drafts. So this is definitely tough for me. I started with positional rankings. So I broke it down by I ranked my quarterbacks, my running backs, my wide receivers, and my tight ends. And then I took the ADP, the current best ball ADP, and I basically, if the number 1 player was a running back, I inserted my top running back there. And from there, I then looked through the list and kind of thought, okay, I like this guy a little more than that guy. I like this guy a little more than that guy. But really, I mean, this from any rankings list, whether it's for best ball, for redraft, for dynasty, sometimes there's not much separating guys, right? You can get into some tiers where you can have, you start getting into the middle, outside of the top 100, outside the top 150, and it's like, how do you separate those guys, right? They're all kind of in those situations where they don't have a locked-in role. They probably need some help. Maybe they can have a big game or two. I mean, how do you really say that this guy is better than this guy? So it was really tough, and I don't know if I'm ever going to want to do this again.
Great. So I scared you away from ranking altogether. That was not the idea.
I just hope nobody's tracking like my success rate by the end of the year, because I would hate to see that.
All right, look. Well, I'll just tell you as far as that goes. Now, here's the good and the bad thing with ranking is I think it actually helps. It helps me as a player, fantasy football player, because it really makes me sit down and think, okay, which guy do I like? Especially when you get to the middle, later rounds, it forces you to choose before you've done the draft. Because when you're in the draft and you have all these lists of guys available, you're sitting there on the clock and you're sweating, and you might make a pick that you didn't like, but it makes you basically choose ahead of time. Okay, I like this guy a little bit better than this guy, or I would take a receiver at this spot, instead of a running back, what have you. So I really feel like you're doing the work up front, in other words, before you even draft. That said, sometimes you feel like you kind of held hostage by your rankings. You said, well, I said I like this guy better, but so I can't take the other guy later, ahead of him. But that's not true, because rankings change. They change all the time. For baseball, we just did a rankings update because it's almost a quarter way through the season. My rankings are pretty different for a lot of guys. Not most of the big name players, but there's a lot of guys I had in the 200s. I had to move them all the way up to the top 100. And some guys who were top 50, they fell out of the top 100, not just because of injury either. So, rankings are not static. Obviously, they have to be fluid, just like week to week. You're not going to stick with the same guys from week 1 all the way to week 17 unless you're doing it wrong. So I kind of have the same process. Basically, I start by position, and then after that, I start thinking in terms of not so much tiers, because I think tiers, it's a misconception that you can just put guy in a tier and say, okay, well, this guy's more valuable than that guy because he's in tier 2 as opposed to tier 3. That can change, because what if there's a running back you really like in tier 2 and you take him, and then all of a sudden this tier 3 player that you really don't need anymore because you got your running back, well, maybe you prefer somebody from a different position now who's in a lower tier. So I kind of play it based by round, honestly. I think that way. I think my tiers in terms of like if it's a 12 team league, I think of, chunks of 12. And that helps me kind of break down how I think guys should fall. So let's talk about where those guys did fall. And again, these rankings done by myself, you, Chris, and Phil Clark. And right now, you would be shocked to find out, not really, our top overall player as a consensus is Todd Gurley. Now, Phil is the only one who had him ranked number 1 overall. So I had Gurley number 2 and you had him number 3. So let me start by immediately attacking you and saying, how can you justify Gurley being the number 3 pick?
Very easily, actually. Le'Veon Bell for me is the clear number 1. He's the only running back. I think I tweeted this out. I forget the exact numbers. He's the only running back to score over 300 fantasy points, or he's him and one other running back in like the last 10 years have ever scored 300 or more PPR fantasy points more than once, and he's done it 3 of the last 4 years. His role is so clear, and he gives you such a high floor in the receiving game, plus the running game. He doesn't even need touchdowns, really. And then I had David Johnson, number 2, who I feel has a very similar role to Le'Veon Bell. We just kind of forgot about him because we haven't seen him in over a year. But if he's healthy, which I think he will be, that was kind of a fluke wrist injury. It wasn't like a knee or something devastating. It was a kind of a fluky wrist injury. He and Le'Veon Bell, to me, are kind of in that same role where they have such a high floor from their receiving numbers, plus the high ceiling from their rushing and touchdown numbers. And then I got Gurley 3 because, there's nothing wrong with 3. He's the 3rd best fantasy player. Like, it's pretty good, right?
It's definitely good. And of course, even if you factor there's maybe some slight regression, that's probably where he'll fall, right? We can't assume he'll be the number 1, fantasy producer again. Now, as far as Bell, it's interesting. Phil had him number 2. I had him at number 6.
Yeah, what's up with that?
So, okay, here's the thing. I understand that when he's on the field, Bell is, potentially he could be the number 1 back, number 1 player in fantasy. I just figure, okay, Gurley, now that we know he has just as much a role in the passing game as someone like Le'Veon Bell, maybe not quite David Johnson level, but he's not somebody you can hold that against him in like a PPR format, right? I think that the guys who have just as high a ceiling, like Gurley, Johnson, and even for me, even Zeke Elliott, because I do think that he's going to see a bigger role even in the passing game. I know we talked about that a couple weeks ago. He doesn't have, Bell has the same, they all have kind of that same ceiling, but those guys don't have the red flags. They don't have the risk. And when I say risk, I know he's going to sign a contract. He's going to play. He's not going to sit out the season. He's been injured. He's been suspended. He's been, threatened to hold out. Okay, I don't need to worry about that with Todd Gurley. I don't need to worry about that with David Johnson. There is a real potential that Bell will miss. I mean, when's the last time he went through a season without missing any games?
Last year.
Before that. Before that. No. So what I'm saying is I prefer a little bit more security. You can't win the draft in your first round, but you can potentially lose it. So I'd rather get the guy that has less red flags. And to me, I'd rather have Gurley, and I'd rather have my number 1 guy. I know you're going to be happy with this. I actually went ahead and I did not put a running back first. I have DeAndre Hopkins number 1.
Yeah, that was surprising. Not only is it surprising that you have DeAndre Hopkins number 1, but you don't even have Antonio Brown. Like, if you're going to go wide receiver, I would assume you would go Antonio Brown over DeAndre Hopkins. I'm curious to hear why you're so high on DeAndre Hopkins this year.
All right. Well, here's the thing. I know we talked about Deshaun Watson potentially being a little overvalued. That might be true, but here's the thing. You have to look at, again, I'm looking for in best ball. Here's why I value a little bit differently. I know you're saying, well, this isn't dynasty, right? We're not talking about age or anything. I'm not thinking about that. What is his potential to have that huge breakout game? Okay, so last year, Hopkins had games of 10 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. He had a game with 3 touchdowns. He had a game with 224 yards and a touchdown, 7 catches, 111 yards, 7 catches, 125 yards, 11 catches, 149 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then several other games with a touchdown. Okay, so how many of those games came with Deshaun Watson? Less than half. Now think about, even if you say, okay, I know Watson's not going to do what he did last year. Obviously, he's not going to carry that hot streak all year. Okay, but is DeAndre Hopkins' situation getting better or worse compared to last year?
Well, it's getting, assuming Deshaun Watson stays healthy all year, it's getting better, of course.
Right. Again, and we can't, you say, well, you can't assume this. Well, you can't assume he'll get hurt. You have to assume Deshaun Watson will be the starter for the majority, if not every single game. So his situation is getting better, and he was already the top guy out there, the top receiver, and he showed the biggest big play ability, but also big game ability. So to me, he's more of a, I don't say league winner, but potential week winner, if that makes any sense. So that's, I see him. And again, he doesn't have the risk that Odell Beckham does. So to me, he's the top receiver. And my last reason why I have him as opposed to a running back number 1 is because I see a shift. So even last year, right? Last year I was like, forget the running back, 0 RB. You got to take a receiver first, right? Dynasty league, you're an idiot if you took a running back in the first round. I'm looking at dynasty leagues and rookie drafts we're doing, and all these players, even rookies, right? We're talking about rookies. Running backs don't last, right? They don't last more than 5 years. They're disposable. I just did a rookie draft, and 8 of the players in the first round were running backs. Last year, that would have been ridiculous. So to me, there's so many talented running backs now still available, that first, second round range. I'd rather take one of the top receivers, because that drop off from elite receiver to second tier receiver, I think to me that's harder to get than an elite receiver.
I agree with you on that point. Definitely. We're seeing, it's kind of like how it was a few years ago in reverse, right? Where you had like this kind of 5 or 6 maybe elite running backs, and then everybody was kind of in, you had a big kind of group that were similar, and then of course you had your lesser guys, and that's kind of how we're at with wide receivers. So I agree with you on that. I mean, I can't argue. It's hard for me to put Hopkins number 1 overall. I could see an argument for him over Antonio Brown, even though you know me, I'm going to go Antonio Brown. But I hope you're right, because I think I've gotten Hopkins in like 30 or 40% of my drafts, and I get him in like the number 7 or number 8 spot. So that would be great.
Oh, and then the other question is, well, who's the top receiver that you would rather have? Now, Beckham, of course, would have been probably last year, not just over Hopkins, because Hopkins was coming off that disappointing season, but Beckham was the best receiver, period, as far as fantasy production. And then Antonio Brown is always right there. I have nothing against Antonio Brown. I would not, if you took Antonio Brown as the number 1 player, I wouldn't say that you're wrong, because he is the most consistent thing you can get. And if you want to play it safer, I'm fine with that, because any of these running backs, like you said, they could see a drop off. They get more banged up. They're more potential to get hurt. So I wouldn't be shocked if somebody took Antonio Brown number 1, and I wouldn't say that was a bad pick. But for me, I just see a little bit more ceiling with Hopkins, just because he's more dynamic at this point. There's less mouths to feed. We know he's going to get the ball a million times if possible, whereas the Steelers, they just got more receivers. They have Juju's coming on. They just got James Washington. They still have Le'Veon Bell. And then Deshaun Watson is still, young quarterback. Hopkins is a little bit younger. Ben Roethlisberger is getting older. He's more prone possibly to injury. So that could affect Antonio Brown's potential. All right, so let's move on now to the next pick, which is, let's say, the number 3 spot in the consensus, and it is a running back, and it is Zeke Elliott. So that was pretty consistent across the board. I have Zeke number 3. Phil has him number 3. You have him number 4. Any risk we should be worrying about with Zeke as far as he's missed his own time? You think that's a good spot for him?
Yeah, to me, Gurley, Bell, Zeke, DJ, and Antonio Brown. They're like the clear top 5 for me. I mean, if I had the number 1 pick 5 different times, I'd probably take each one of those guys. just to spread out my exposure. But I'm okay with all 5 of those guys. To me, they're like that. They're like that first tier. Maybe Hopkins too. He's kind of on the edge. I do worry a little bit about Hopkins because I don't know. We've seen some down years from Hopkins, and I don't know quite what to expect from Deshaun Watson this year. But yeah, to me, those 5 guys are interchangeable. Whatever if somebody grabbed any of those guys at number 1, I would not like freak out about it.
Well, let me ask you this: as far as best ball specifically, do you weigh it differently when you're drafting in the first round, and of course when you're ranking here? As far as the risk reward, typically if you're in a league, in Dynasty, of course, you think youth, you think long term, you think potential. In a redraft league, you kind of want to play it safe, right? You don't want a guy who's got these big red flags. In best ball, does that color your decision at all in the first round? Do you weigh any sort of risk? Guys like Le'Veon Bell or Beckham, or somebody like Zeke who's been suspended or had contract issues or off the field stuff. Do you worry about that, or do you just go pure the guy who has potentially the highest ceiling?
Yeah, it's not even really about any of that, honestly, for me. It's more about, because I play in a lot of best ball drafts, not as much as some people, not like, Todd a few weeks back said he played in like 150. But I'll probably be right around 50 when it's all said and done. So I'm going to have, I've only had 1 pick inside the top 7, which is ridiculous. And I'm like 20 drafts in. So I've been very unlucky this year. So I've had a lot of kind of the same guys, unfortunately. But typically what I like to do is it's more about spreading my exposure. So last year, I think I had the number 1 pick 4 or 5 times, and I took Le'Veon Bell there. I took David Johnson there. I took Antonio Brown there. And I think I might have even taken Zeke one time there. So it's more just about getting a share of those, as many of these top guys as I can. Because like you saw last year, if a guy has a season like Todd Gurley did, or a guy has a season like Le'Veon Bell did, that can, I think Todd Gurley's win share was close to like 40% or something ridiculous like that. So, just getting as many shares as I can of these top guys is really what I'm thinking about. I'm not too worried about, like, again, those guys for me, Gurley, Bell, Zeke, David Johnson, Brown, even Hopkins a little bit. I'm gonna try to get as many shares of those guys as I can. So it's not about who has a higher ceiling. It's not about who I like more. It's really just about getting as much exposure. Now I haven't been able to get much exposure because I haven't had those high draft picks. The only guy, and we haven't talked about him yet, the only guy I'm really not likely gonna draft in the first round, because I feel like his ADP is still too high. I mean, I might draft him once just in case, just to have him. And that's Alvin Kamara, because I just really don't think, even with the Ingram suspension, I don't think he's suddenly going to turn into this workhorse back. I just don't. I don't think he can pay off that ADP. So he's the one guy I haven't really grabbed in the first round yet, although I probably will at some point just to make sure I have some exposure of him. But other than that, it's more about exposure and making sure I have enough shares of these guys so that if one of them, has like just a huge year, I have some of them.
All right, interesting. Speaking of Kamara, we'll get to him in a second. Let's run down our top 5 here. So we have Gurley, again, as a consensus, the 3 of us. Gurley, number 1. Bell, number 2. Elliott is number 3. David Johnson, number 4. And then DeAndre Hopkins is number 5. So no big surprises there, I don't think. Number 6 is Antonio Brown, and we all have him pretty close to the same level. Odell Beckham is number 7. I know we've talked about him quite a bit on our best ball episodes because we're targeting him, and you've gotten him as late as 10, I think you said 10 or 11.
Actually, I did a live draft last night where I started from the 12 spot. So I had the last pick in the first round, and I started Odell Beckham, Julio Jones.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a pretty nice combo.
Yeah, I would say so.
So, that's where we have him valued. His actual ADP, though, let me tell you, comparing to, this is what I see on actual My Fantasy League site, MFL ADP for 2018. They have Gurley number 1, no surprise there. Hopkins number 2, so not too far off from mine. Zeke's number 3, Bell is number 4. Where do you think? Actually, no. Let me ask you this instead. Who do you think's number 5?
Antonio Brown. Well,
Is
no, because
not.
they have Hopkins too, which is weird because I haven't seen him go that high very often. Um, so wait, it was Gurley, Hopkins, then Bell.
Zeke and then Bell.
I would have to say David Johnson 5.
That would make sense. It is not.
Alvin Kamara.
Saquon Barkley.
Wow, are you sure this isn't Dynasty?
I'm showing full redrafts, not dynasty, full redrafts. Odell Beckham number 6, Saquon Barkley. So let's look at our ranking. We have him not too far down, actually. He is number 9 after Alvin Kamara. Kamara's 8, and then Barkley's number 9. Now, you have Barkley ranked number 6. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so there you go. So you shouldn't be surprised. You have him ranked almost as high. I have him at 15, so I was actually the lowest on Barkley. So now I'm really confused. My head's spinning because I thought it was the other way around. I thought you were calling Barkley overvalued, overrated, that he's going to struggle in the New York Giants system.
When did I say that?
Well, your prediction was that the Giants fans were going to be pissed because he was going to go to New York and then he was going to, what was it? You're going to see him flop, or how'd you say it?
No, I said it's going to set the franchise back.
Oh, because of their draft.
Yeah, because they needed that quarterback. I think it's a good situation for him. I think he's locked into 300 plus touches, and I think he's locked into 50 plus receptions. So for me, once you get past the top 4 running backs, he for me is the clear number 5. Now I know a lot of people have Kamara ranked ahead of him, as far as running backs go, but I already told you my feelings on Kamara. Give me the guy who's locked into 300 touches with 50 plus catches over the guy who might get, maybe 250 touches. If we're talking about 150 carries and 80 catches, you're only talking about 230 touches. I mean, maybe Kamara can hit 250 this year, but I want a guy who's going to give me 300 plus touches with that nice, 50 reception kind of floor. But you can usually get him. I mean, I've been getting him like with the 8th or 9th pick in my best ball drafts.
Okay. And yeah, you don't have to maybe reach for him at 5. Of course, it depends where you pick. If you're Leon Barkley, you can't wait past the first round. But no, I was just a little surprised you had him. Not that you had him higher than Kamara, but you do have him higher than Odell Beckham. I know you were so happy to get Beckham where he was. So if you're at number 7 overall, let's say you have the number 7 pick and Barkley and Beckham are both there, you're taking Barkley every time?
Not every time, because again, remember, I'm trying to get exposed. I don't want to be too high of an exposure on one guy. Like if you just take Saquon Barkley every time and he gets hurt, like David Johnson last year, if you had the number 1 pick, and let's say you had the number 1 pick 10 times, you got, and you just auto drafted David Johnson, who was a consensus number 1 last year, that was $100 you just threw away, right? Because your number 1 pick didn't even play, and you probably lost every one of those leagues unless you got really lucky and had like Todd Gurley and Alvin Kamara or something. But more than likely, you lost those leagues. So you can't just, always pick the same guy in the same spot. So I will pick Barkley sometimes, Odell sometimes. Now, I prefer if it's close like that between a running back that I really like and a wide receiver I really like in the first round. Believe it or not, in best ball drafts, I go with the running back because it's just so hard. Like, because you don't have to worry about which wide receiver to start every week, right? If you draft a bunch of these like, boom bust wide receivers like Kenny Stills, Rashard Matthews, Deshaun Jacksons, whatever, guys who don't give you that week to week consistency, you don't have to worry about it, because as long as, if you have some good top tier kind of safe floor receivers, like 2nd or 3rd or 4th round type receivers, if 1 or 2 of those guys go off one week, they're in your lineup. You don't have to worry about like, oh, they were on my bench and they got me 30 points, right? Which is super frustrating. So in best ball, I tend to prefer the early running back because the drop off, there's a huge, cliff at running back as well. Once you get past for me, it's like once you get past Kenyon Drake, I really don't feel that good about anybody after Kenyon Drake. So, and even Drake, I like Drake, but there's still some risk there, right? Even like guys like Rashad Penny, who I'm sure we'll talk about later, there's some risk there. So if I can get a guy like Barkley or DJ or Bell or Zeke or somebody who I feel good that if they play all 16 games, they're going to give me solid week-to-week production with a good ceiling, I want to lock that in.
Yeah, once you get to Kenyon Drake, you're starting to run some risk for sure. I'm just gonna say, without ranting about the Dolphins again, don't fall in love with last year's second half numbers. Let's just put it that way. So, but no, I agree with you, and I feel again that's why I was saying about Hopkins there. I just feel like there's such a fall off at receiver as far as getting those elite guys. You know, I totally understand getting one of those top running backs, like you said, guaranteed touches. But to me, I see as far as the current ADP, and we'll talk more about that from what I'm seeing on my fantasy league, there's still so many quality running backs you could actually get in the second round. I'd rather take that elite receiver because I'm a little more iffy on guys like, you know, Keenan Allen or Devontae Adams as my number one receiver. I'd rather have a guy like Leonard Fournette or Dalvin Cook in the second round than those guys. But let's move on. So talk about Barkley there. He was number 9 for our consensus. Number 10 is Leonard Fournette, and he's probably going to fall right around that range. I'd say generally he's not going to be one of the top 3 or 4 running backs off the board, but he's definitely going to be in that first tier. And his current ADP for MFL10s is he's number 13 off the board. So you actually don't have to pay a first round pick for him necessarily. But of course, if you really want him, you want that exposure, like you're saying, you don't necessarily want to wait either. Number 11, Julio Jones. And then number 12, another running back, Kareem Hunt. Here's where we start to see some of the discrepancies. So Kareem Hunt, I was the lowest on. I had him number 18, and Phil has him all the way number 9. He has Kareem Hunt ahead of Saquon Barkley and Leonard Fournette. What do you think about that?
I mean, I obviously don't agree, but I think there's more risk there. The Giants did not spend a number 2 pick, and the Jaguars did not spend a number 4 pick? Was Leonard Fournette last year number 4?
I think so.
So they didn't spend top 5 picks to put them in timeshares or to have them, split work with lesser backs. And we saw that with Fournette last year. He averaged over 20 carries a game. I don't know if Saquon Barkley is going to average over 20 carries a game because I don't know if the Giants are going to be in positive game script enough to give him 20 carries a game, but he's going to be the guy. He's going to be out there most of the time. We're only going to see Jonathan Stewart or Wayne Gallman when he needs a break, right? He's going to be out there a lot, just like Leonard Fournette. Kareem Hunt, I'm a little nervous about, like Spencer Ware. They still have Charkandrick West. They brought in Damian Williams. I think they signed somebody else. I mean, it doesn't make me feel great that they're signing all these running backs if they, were so confident in Kareem Hunt. Now, that said, I still think he's locked into a big enough workload. I think he'll be somewhere around like that 60% range, which is just fine in today's age for a running back. But I think he doesn't quite have the guaranteed workload that Barkley and Fournette are going to have.
I agree. And, we've talked a little bit about Spencer Ware. I don't know that I'm worried about him specifically. I don't know how much of a factor he'll even be. But I do know I don't trust completely Andy Reid and that offense and, new quarterback that we know nothing about. We don't know how that's going to go. So again, just a little more cautious, I guess, about him. And again, especially when I have a pretty much sure thing, as opposed to Leonard Fournette, I know he's going to get his touches. I know he's going to be it around the goal line. I know they're going to feed him the ball as much as possible, just like you were saying. So, if I had to choose, to me, that's an easy choice. I take the sure thing. So in MFL 10s, he's right now got an ADP of 10 overall, and mainly because of my ranking, we have him at number 12, so slightly lower. You guys split the difference between 11 and 9. Melvin Gordon is number 13, not too exciting there. Dalvin Cook, number 14. And then we get into a receiver run. The next 5 guys are all receivers. So I want you to pick out one of these guys to kind of highlight here, and you can talk about maybe the guy you're highest about or the guy you're lowest about. So in order, 15, we have AJ Green, 16, Michael Thomas, 17, Keenan Allen, 18 Mike Evans, and then 19 Devontae Adams. Now, out of those guys, you were the highest on Thomas. You have him 13 overall. And of course, I was flipped. I had him the lowest out of those guys. I have him at 21. You're the lowest on Mike Evans. And guess what? That's who I'm highest on. I have him number 10. So I guess let's choose between those two, Thomas and Evans. Tell me why you think Thomas is a better pick for best ball.
Well, I mean, the number one reason is Drew Brees. He's in that Saints offense. I think in the first 4 games without Mark Ingram, they're going to throw the ball more than we saw last year, which will help Thomas. But, I mean, Cameron Meredith, Ted Ginn, they don't worry me as far as, taking away targets from Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas was really good last year, and he barely scored any touchdowns. Like, he barely found the end zone. If he finds the end zone, 8 to 10 times this year, he's going to have a monster season. So I think he's just got a ton of upside with a nice, safe floor in that Drew Brees Saints offense. I'm really curious why you were lowest on him, though.
Well, and I'm not low on Thomas at all. But as far as those guys, well, the main thing when I'm thinking between those two guys, you said the word already exactly. It's basically it's simple, one word: touchdowns. Now, Thomas didn't score a lot of touchdowns last year, but neither did Evans. Evans only had 5 touchdowns. But the year before that, he had 12, and his rookie year, he had 12. I know that he's going to be a red zone monster. I know if Tampa Bay, kind of gets it together and has some sort of running game, if Winston maybe throws a little bit less interceptions, and they show a little more consistency, we know what Evans can do, right? He can do 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns. Thomas, perfectly safe. He did not have very many monster games, and I followed the Saints pretty closely last year. He's the perfect example of a high floor guy. He was targeted, if I remember, at least 8 times in like every game except for 2. That's great. But he also had very few 100-yard games. He didn't score multiple touchdowns in games. And now they're going to actually add a little bit more to their offense. They added Cam Meredith. They have at least, I know it's not like a great upgrade, but Ben Watson is better than Kobe Fleener, which was non-existent at the tight end position. They got Traquan Smith at receiver. They'll break him in. I don't think that Thomas is going to reach maybe the heights that Evans will. And so I think, again, week to week, who's going to be more likely to win me a week with a huge monster game? And to me, it's Evans. Does that sound crazy?
No, it doesn't sound crazy at all. But I think sometimes in best ball, we kind of ignore, we put a little too much emphasis on ceiling versus floor. You still want to have, a good floor, because it's going to be really tough to win your league if you are the lowest scoring team at all in any week during the year. Like if you just have one of those bomb weeks where you're the lowest scoring team that week, it's going to be really hard to make up for that. So there's something to be said about having, some nice floor guys as well. And I don't dislike Evans, even though I had him ranked the lowest out of this group. I still really like Mike Evans. I do worry about just a little bit more in that offense. I think that defense is going to be a little better. They have Chris Godwin. They have Deshaun Jackson. They drafted Ronald Jones, who could finally give them a running game. So maybe they don't have to throw as much as they've had to in the past. So I like Evans a lot, so it's not like I don't like him. I just think out of this group, I have him the lowest, but that doesn't mean I'm by any means low on him.
Absolutely. And again, at this point, you shouldn't be low on any of these guys, right? They're all top 20 players. So, again, it comes to personal preference. Who do you like and who do you have exposure to already? If this is your very first ever MFL10, you're trying it out, you pick whichever guy you like and you think is going to have the best season. If you've done 5 drafts already and you have Mike Evans in 3 leagues, probably try Thomas or somebody else instead, right? All right, so number 20 for our rankings, we have LaShawn McCoy. We talked quite a bit about him last time, so we'll skip over him for this. Jordan Howard is 21. Speaking of big plays, Tyreek Hill, number 22. 23, we have Devontae Freeman. There's a little bit of variation here. I have Freeman lower. I have him at 32. Phil has him a little higher at 19, and you're kind of right in the middle. Actually, you're right on target there. You have him at 23. Just real quick about Freeman. Do you think he might go a little under the radar this year because now there are so many other running backs who've kind of surpassed him, not just with production from last year? I know he was hurt a little bit, but also kind of in name value because in MFL10s, his ADP right now is 26 overall. So you could potentially wait till the third round and grab Devontae Freeman. Do you think he's still RB1 caliber?
I think he is, but I'm a little worried. We didn't see him involved as much in the passing game with Sarkisian last year as we did when Kyle Shanahan was there the 2 previous years, and that's what has him down in the rankings a bit for me. So, and I think you're right. He is kind of going under the radar because of that, and I think he's a good value because he has that potential. I mean, we've seen it the 2 previous years. He was, I think, first and sixth, RB1 and RB6. So he definitely has that kind of upside. But he's going to need to get more work in the passing game like we saw under Kyle Shanahan, and I don't know if that's going to happen. So I think that's kind of pushing him down a little bit.
Absolutely. So just someone to keep an eye on. I'm not saying he's someone you should necessarily target. If he slips far enough, though, don't forget about him. He's still got plenty of value. All right, moving right along here. Now we're at number 24, and here's the appearance of Gronk. Not too much variation here as far as Gronk. I had him at 20. You had him 27, Phil at 28. And then we have Doug Baldwin, and then Travis Kelce at 26. So as far as Gronk and Kelce, even though our numbers are a little bit flipped, we all had them 2 away. We both had Gronk just 2 spots ahead of Kelce. Do you think there's any concern there as far as well, actually, let me ask you this. Who has more concern? Kelce with a new quarterback or Gronk with his whole I'm going to retire and just, live on a party boat and screw football thing?
No, I'm not worried about Gronk at all. I mean, if the only thing you can ever worry about with Gronk is him getting banged up during the season and missing a game or 2 because he plays so physical. But he's in the same situation. He's got Tom Brady still. He's a monster. He's quite possibly the best tight end the game has ever seen. I'm glad we have him number 1. I'm glad we didn't get into recency bias and put Kelce number 1. And definitely, I mean, I still like Kelce a lot. I mean, I have him ranked as my tight end 2, so obviously I'm still very high on him. But you do have to worry about a little bit, with Patrick Mahomes there. We don't know how Patrick Mahomes is gonna be. Alex Smith, he leaned on Kelce a lot, right? He really leaned on Kelce. Now we have Patrick Mahomes there. We don't know if that's going to be the case. Is he going to, he's got Tyreek Hill on one end and Sammy Watkins on the other. Is he just going to, take more deep shots with those guys, throw it in the traffic, whereas Alex Smith might have just checked it down to Kelce. So there definitely is more risk, in my opinion, with Kelce than Gronk.
Interesting. Yeah, Gronk, I mean, obviously there's injury and you can't, to some extent, of course, you don't want to make him a first-round pick like some people did last couple of years, but at the same time, I don't think you can just assume he's going to get hurt. He's still a top tight end. So rounding out the top 30 here, we have Jerick McKinnon at 27, Christian McCaffrey at 28, Stephon Diggs at 29, and then Larry Legends, Larry Fitzgerald at number 30. Let's talk real quick about C-Mac. McCaffrey, you have him all the way up at 18, and I'm the lowest. I have him down at 42. Now, I'm not that worried about C.J. Anderson becoming like a bell cow. I guess what I'm thinking is the fact that they're going out and seeking all this help as far as getting Anderson. Of course, they needed a receiver. They brought in DJ Moore. This is not an offense that's ever going to stop spreading the ball out. And, of course, Cam Newton, he's going to take half those rushing touchdowns anyways. So I just don't see McCaffrey necessarily being up there in those first couple tiers for running backs. But why do you have him as a top 20 player?
I mean, even if we assume C.J. Anderson does what Jonathan Stewart did last year, which I think is probably likely, and I like C.J. Anderson more than Jonathan Stewart as far as a running back goes, so he might even do a little better. Christian McCaffrey, we're talking about a 100-target running back more than likely. I mean, yeah, they drafted DJ Moore, but it's just DJ Moore, Devin Funchess, and an aging Greg Olsen. To me, this is like an easy 100 targets for Christian McCaffrey, and if he catches 80 passes again, I mean, that's such a nice, safe floor at the running back spot. He gives you that, because you do need, like I said, you need that floor. I mean, you need guys that every week give you those locked in points, so that then you can, when your fringe guys go off, that gives you those huge ceilings. And I'm not saying you should ignore ceiling, but it's nice to have that nice floor guy. And then if McCaffrey does get more involved in the running game, which I think he will be this year, his ceiling could go even higher. So I get it. I mean, there's definitely some concern there, especially if he doesn't get more work in the running game, but I think he will. So he wasn't I don't necessarily like McCaffrey the player as much as a lot of people, but I just think that with those target numbers, he's going to give you that nice, safe kind of like low end RB1.
All right. So again, kind of prioritizing the floor there, a guy that is always going to be involved because they're always going to give him touches. So that makes a lot of sense. Let's go down now, and I'm not going to read all of these, but let's at least finish out the top 50 so you guys kind of have an idea of who we have there near the top. So 31, Adam Thielen. 32, Alshon Jeffrey. 33, Allen Robinson. 34, believe it or not, we were almost all right on the same page with Amari Cooper. I had him 33, you had him 34, Phil had him 36. So we all have Cooper right there in the mid-30s because I think we probably have no idea what to expect of him this year, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a big hot take to say he'll be better than last year because I was putrid. Will he be as good as we hoped he was going to be, going into last year? Maybe not, probably somewhere in between. So I think we saw the worst of him last year. Let's put it that way.
Oh, God, let's hope so. I don't know. And don't make me invoke Gruden again. Let's move past that. All right. 35, T.Y. Hilton, definitely due for a bounce back, but a lot of questions there. Joe Mixon at 36. I've been burned by Mixon way too many times, and by that I mean his rookie year. So I have him ranked pretty lower than that, but that's just probably me holding a grudge. 37 is Zach Ertz. 38 is Josh Gordon. 39, let's talk about rookie running back number 2 here, Darius Geis. We're all pretty much in the same area there. I have him 38, you have him 43, and Phil's at 33. Now, it does concern me in PPR leagues, and this is a PPR format, that we basically have already been told as a fact he will have almost no involvement in the passing game. He will play on first and second down, right? Isn't that what Gruden said? And Chris Thompson will do exactly what he did last year. So to me, doesn't that cap his ceiling quite a bit?
It definitely does. It definitely caps the ceiling. But again, if you look at the running backs we're looking at here, I mean, you're looking at Joe Mixon, who probably should be higher, but you had a grudge. Darius Geis, Kenyon Drake, and then you're looking at Rashad Penny, Alex Collins, J.H.I., Mark Ingram, who's going to miss 4 games. I mean, you got a lot of – none of these running backs are locked in, like guaranteed 250, 300 touch guys. I think guys can get there. They can get to 250 touches on the ground. So to hear it's like, you're kind of in that range where you're getting to those fringe running backs where if you don't grab one of these guys here, if you're really starting to get, take your chances here with some real risk.
Yeah, and there's risk all over at this stage. Like you said, you mentioned those guys. Drake, we don't know what his role is exactly going to be because they brought Frank Gore in and Kalen Ballage. I mean, not an early round pick, but, he's a guy, if the coaching staff likes him, you never know. Alex Collins, we don't know how many touches he's going to get. Jay Ajayi, we don't know how long he's going to hold up. He's in a committee anyways. Ingram, you mentioned. Dion Lewis should get a lot of touches, but how many touchdowns? Because they're going to bring in Henry to do kind of the heavy lifting there. So, yeah, I'd say if you have to choose between a guy in a kind of a questionable situation, you probably should go with the talent, right? Guy you think has a breakaway speed, you think has a chance to be a game breaker. So, and who knows? Maybe he could show that he has better hands than they expect, and maybe he'll get a little bit of involvement.
Yeah, and Thompson isn't the most durable player, so there's always the chance that he misses some games. In which case, guys may see a 3-down roll in those games. So, I think that the potential is there. I'm kind of curious. I'd like to talk a little bit about Rashad Penny. I have him ranked 33rd, but you and Phil both have him ranked, 50th and 59th. So I'm obviously much higher on Rashad Penny than you guys are. I want to hear your thoughts on why you're so low. Well, I shouldn't say so low. You still have him ranked in the top 60, but why you're much lower on Rashad Penny than I am.
I find kind of subconsciously, I really don't try to be, but obviously when I look at it, I'm just a little lower, a little more conservative as far as rookies in general before the season starts, especially way before training camp starts, because we don't know what kind of shape they're coming in. We don't know how they're going to fit, because the team sees them as a fit in their offense, but until they actually get in there and try things out, you never know. And there's so many rookies that we have this expectation for, and it just doesn't happen. Seattle's not a team that has a lot of success running the ball recently. They tried out how many different running backs. I don't think all those running backs they've tried out were untalented. I think the offensive line was horrible last year. I know they're going to try to fix it, but I don't see a bunch of Pro Bowlers on that offensive line yet. So I'm not going to assume that they're just going to be able to go in and run the ball just because they say they want to. So I'm going to be a little more hesitant to pick him. I'd rather have a guy like Deion Lewis, who I know what he can do. And I know he's on a pretty good offense now, which should be a pretty good offense. So, yeah, that's just me, kind of playing it safe there. And they do have so many other running backs they've tried out. If Penny doesn't last, they've shown they'll bring somebody else. They'll bring back, I don't know, who was it, J.D. McKissick or they'll try something else out. Chris Carson is still there, I guess. So, no, I'd rather wait.
All right, it's fair.
In the 40s, let's talk about Golden Tate, Demaryius Thomas at the top there, 40-41. Kenyon Drake, 42. Marvin Jones, Brandon Cooks, and then Juju at 45. Let's talk about Brandon Cooks because you have him just at number 60. Phil and I both have him in the late 30s, 36, 39. So I know you said before you're down on Goff. And so I think therefore down on Cooks. Do you think he's going to be basically putting up Sammy Watkins-like numbers next year? Or you just think the whole offense, passing offense as a whole is going to go down or what?
I do think the passing offense will go down, but I think it'll be better than what we saw from Sammy Watkins last year. That was terrible. I just think he's going to be very boom bust. He's gonna have those just complete duds. I mean, you got Gurley catches passes, Cooper Kupp entering his second year, Robert Woods, the clear number one. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think defenses are going to treat Cooks like the number one, which means he's going to get the tougher corner matchups like we saw last year with Sammy Watkins. So I would prefer, I just don't think he's going to have, this isn't the Brandon Cooks we were used to in New Orleans and New England. I think he's going to be even more boom bust. And for me, if I don't want boom bust quite this early. I want a little more safety this early with that boom potential. And then I'll take my boom bust guys later on in the draft where I can just, grab, 3 or 4 wide receivers later in the draft that have boom bust potential. Maybe not quite as good as Brandon Cooks, but they have that kind of potential, and let the software, put the right guys in the lineup for me. So for me, it's just, I just don't think he's going to have too many just down weeks where he doesn't really do anything. And we're not going to see him at the level we've seen him recently, or that we're used to seeing him in his career.
Yeah, I agree. Compared to recent situations, being with the Saints and Drew Brees, being with Tom Brady and the Patriots, this would be the least appealing. So I think it's fair to say he's going to go down a bit. I still like his ability. I think he'll fit well. But yeah, I totally understand waiting on him. And the last guy I want to talk about here in the top 50 is quarterback. Our first quarterback making an appearance is Aaron Rodgers. That's not a surprise there. I don't want to talk about him specifically. We have him at 48, and we're all right on there. I had him 51. You have him 50. Phil at 44. In MFL10 current ADP, the first quarterbacks are going off the board in the mid-20s. We're all a lot lower in the quarterbacks. So why do you think some people are trying to get their quarterbacks earlier maybe than they should?
Well, I haven't seen I don't think I've seen him going that high. Typically, I see him in maybe like the 4th round. If you got somebody who's taking quarterback too early, maybe the 3rd. I don't know if I've seen him in the 20s. That's crazy. That's just wrong. If somebody's taking a quarterback that early in best ball, they're a contributor, as MFL Todd said. They're basically the rake, right? They're the rake. So don't. If you're listening to this, do not take a quarterback that early, even Aaron Rodgers. Just wait. There's tons of great quarterbacks. The quarterback sweet spot is kind of like 9 to 12. I've gotten Cam Newton in the 9th, who I really like. I've seen a lot of people have gotten Drew Brees in the 9th, who I really like. Then you can get guys like Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, Big Ben, probably a bunch of other people I'm forgetting in the 10th. So there's plenty of good quarterbacks available in that 9 through 12 range. There's no reason to take one earlier. Now, that being said, if a guy like Aaron Rodgers is still there in like the 6th round and he's just an amazing value, I'm going to grab him. I'm not going to pass on him. But that rarely happens. So most of the time I'm getting quarterbacks in that 9 to 12 kind of range.
Absolutely. We've talked in pretty much any format, unless it's a super flex league, but you don't need to grab a quarterback early, and it's best if you don't. I know we talked about roster construction a few weeks back, so there's plenty of depth, and especially as long as you're taking a solid second quarterback in an MFL10, you don't need Aaron Rodgers, right? You just don't. So,
no, I mean, it's a nice luxury, but again, he's gonna have to drop for me to take him. He's got to be a value for me,
right? And that goes for any guy. Tom Brady, Russell Wilson. I don't care. I'm not taking a guy. And even now that I think about it, number 50 or 48, where we have him right now, I probably wouldn't even take him that high either. So that's kind of where we had him valued. But realistically, yeah, you should be waiting. So that was our top 50. And of course, we have so much more available. We cannot possibly break down all of these for you guys on this show. Let me just tell you that this right now, our best ball rankings, as far as what's going to be posted on the site soon. And I'm not even including defense and kickers because, of course, there's no kickers there. But, defense, that's a whole separate thing. We're not going to analyze too deeply. But our rankings go up to 250 deep, plus some more, which we're just finalizing. So, guys, if you want to know the breakdown as far as who to pick for your MFL 10s, you can check RotoBaller and you can see those. And we're going to break down what it means. And we're going to have some positional analysis, some strategy. We're going to have so much MFL 10 coverage, you're not going to believe it. You have nowhere else that you need to look. Just look on RotoBaller. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Fantasy Bomb. Chris, anything you want to add in there about our rankings? Or you just want to say, yes, please, let's do some more rankings, do it again?
No, I mean, I appreciate that you guys thought highly enough of me to do the rankings. It was very difficult, and I have a whole new appreciation for people who rank, and especially those who do it well. I have a whole new appreciation for them.
I don't know how many of us do it well. Let's just say, like I said, it's an art, not a science, and we tend to look forward when we rank. We don't look back because if you look back, then you'd probably never rank again. So, yeah. But it's fun. It's fun. I do enjoy it. All right, guys, thanks for checking us out. We're here pretty much every week. Fantasy Bomb. You can check us at Fantasy Bomb Pod on Twitter. And, of course, RotoBaller Radio on rotoballer.com. And we're here all the time breaking down fantasy football dynasty, best ball, redraft, auction, rookies, anything you need. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.